Arya Stark felt the subtle tug of the breeze on her cheeks as she stood at the prow of the ship cutting across the narrow sea. The last time she had ventured across these waters, she had been a lost girl in search of the House of Black and White. Now, she returned a woman of many names but one identity, Arya of Winterfell, the girl who had once learned to become no one. Yet she carried something else within her, an ambition as wide as the ocean beneath her feet, a vision that transcended the cold green hills of Westeros and the labyrinthine canals of Braavos. Over years of wandering, of training, and of listening to people's stories, she had nurtured an idea like a secret flame hidden beneath the ashes of her old life. Now, as the gulls followed the ship and the wind carried the tang of salt through her hair, she was ready to let that flame grow into something that might reshape the face of Essos. She remembered the first time she had seen Braavos, when the Titan loomed above her, a silent sentinel proclaiming both warning and welcome. Then she had been a lonely child, hungry for vengeance, carrying a list of names and a heart full of sorrow. She had sought to become a servant of the many-faced god. Instead, she had discovered that one's own identity could never fully be shed, that the ghosts of her past were too deeply woven into her soul. But in that contradiction, she also found a kind of liberation. She had learned how to lie in perfect sincerity, how to kill with a precise flick of the wrist, how to fade into the crowd. She had learned the shape of no one, while never ceasing to be Arya Stark of Winterfell. This duality gave her power, and in time it gave her a sense of direction. She had sailed west, then returned home. She had played her part in the wars that ravaged the Seven Kingdoms, and she had avenged her family in the shadows. Finally, when the dust settled and the crows feasted on the battlefield dead, she found that her restlessness had only grown. She could not remain in the quiet halls of Winterfell, nor in the newly rebuilt capital. She felt as though all of Westeros had become too small for the scale of her hopes. Something inside her told her there was another path, one that would take her beyond the familiar and into the unknown frontiers of the East. And so, quietly, she had set sail once more, leaving behind tearful goodbyes and the howling ghosts of the past, determined to shape the next step of her destiny. She landed in Braavos with little more than a small bag of supplies and the braided leather strap that once bound Needle to her hip. Needle still lay in the hidden cabin of her small sloop, never far from her reach. In the city of canals and courtesans, gamblers and bravos, she walked the narrow lanes with unassuming grace. She listened, she observed. In the shadows of the moonlit streets, she recognized her old teachers by the way they moved, or did not move, watching her from behind corners. Perhaps they wondered what had brought her back. Perhaps they feared she would be a threat to their secrets. Or perhaps they simply did not care. The Faceless men had their own ways of perceiving the world, their own labyrinth of loyalties. Days turned to weeks, and she found a small room in the quieter part of the city, where the sunlight filtered through the shutters at dawn and the clang of the forge only reached her ears in a distant hum. She could have hidden among the masks and walls of the House of Black and White again, but something in her refused to yield to that life entirely. She had become an assassin, yes, but she remained a Stark at heart. She took the old Braavosi greetings, the curtness of Sel's words, the humor of fishermen, and the gossip of spice traders, weaving them into her daily routine. On the surface, she was just Arya, a young woman living alone in a cramped lodging by the canal. Beneath it, her mind churned with the designs she had carried across the sea. When she felt the time was right, she reached out. Her first invitation was to a man known only as the Silk-Masked, a cunning broker of secrets in the eastern quarter of Braavos. She had met him once in a tavern when she was younger, disguised under another face, gleaning bits of knowledge about the hidden corners of the city. Arya knew he dabbled in everything from rare poisons to the slave trade that flickered in the shadows outside Braavos' official stance against it. She approached him as Arya, without any borrowed face, to gauge his reaction. He knew who she was, of course. The Silk-Masked had ways of discerning truths. He seemed intrigued, not frightened. He recognized the marks of training in her stance, in the subtle calm behind her gaze. More importantly, he saw potential in the boldness she displayed, coming openly to him. Over cups of dark wine and morsels of grilled fish, They spoke of the world beyond Westeros, beyond Bravos, in places where chaos reigned, and no kings or queens held dominion. Arya listened carefully. She asked questions about the free cities, about the Dothraki clans, about Volantis and its ancient tiger cloaks, about Slaver's Bay, now perhaps freed but still in turmoil, and the scattered remnants of the Golden Company that once claimed to fight for a Targaryen cause. He answered readily, but always with a hint of a sly smile. As though each piece of information was part of a larger puzzle, he was selling her bit by bit. After many meetings, she proposed a partnership unlike any he had entertained before. She wished to travel through Essos, gathering a network of those who believed in a higher calling. Not for gold, not for petty lords, but for the principle of anonymity, for the dignity of a cause that would serve the many-faced god's sense of ultimate balance. She wanted to create something akin to an empire, but not in the sense of a crown or a throne. It would be an empire of shadows, of identities cast off and assumed at will, a refuge for the skilled and the desperate alike, so long as they adhered to a single rule: loyalty to the nameless ideal. The silk mask studied her in silence for a long time, tapping a finger against the stem of his goblet. Bravos was no stranger to secret societies and hidden brotherhoods. Yet Arya's vision was more expansive. The silk mask pressed her for details. Why would she do this? What was she really after? Was it vengeance, some twisted need for personal glory, or had she simply gone mad? Arya offered him nothing but the truth as she saw it. She spoke of the wars she had witnessed, the endless cycle of bloodshed in Westeros, and how fragile it all was. She spoke of men and women who might have been spared if there existed a force that acted purely in the interest of balance, unclouded by political ambition or old grudges. She spoke of giving people the chance to shed the names and pasts that shackled them, to become whoever they needed to be. She saw the power in that, the power to shape destinies without kneeling to any crown. In the days after, she also met with old contacts from her previous life in Bravos. The fishwife who had once sold her eel pies recognized her, and though the woman had no direct interest in Arya's ambitions, she passed on a rumor that the Iron Bank's agents were curious about the young Stark's reappearance in the city. The old Captain Ternesio Terres, who had once ferried her across the sea, was away, but his first mate recognized Arya. He offered a quiet boat ride along the edges of the lagoon for old time's sake. As they drifted, he told Arya stories about new trade routes opening farther east and the hidden demand for skillful killers in merchant wars. She listened and added these details to the tapestry forming in her mind. When she was confident that her circle of informants was large enough, she dispatched coded messages to certain corners of the city. The first official gathering of those interested in her idea took place in an abandoned warehouse near the Purple Harbor. Thick dust covered the rafters, and the air smelled of moldy rope and dried fish. A single lamp flickered in the center of the room, throwing grotesque shadows on the walls. One by one, they slipped in. Pickpockets, sellswords, a few merchants, and some men who hid their faces even as they entered. She recognized a couple from her old days in the House of Black and White. None spoke above a whisper, and yet, she could sense their curiosity humming in the darkness. Arya stood in the pool of lamplight, her face half bathed in gold, half consumed by shadow. She explained her vision plainly, letting each word echo in the stale air. She spoke of forming a new power that would transcend the petty boundaries of lords and kings, a network of eyes and ears and blades, a community of the nameless. Not a simple guild of assassins, nor a congregation of thieves, but something more unified and far-reaching. Some might call it an empire if they wished, for it would stretch across seas and deserts and mountains, but it would not be ruled by one face alone. There were skeptical chuckles at first. Some thought she was merely a dreamer drunk on her own fantasies. Others suspected a trap. But Arya's confidence, the quiet steel in her gaze, and her known history of taking improbable journeys swayed them. She told them there would be more meetings, that she would find them again once she had traveled and seen the places she meant to influence. She told them if they truly believed in the many-faced god's impartial justice, where life and death were part of a grand design, they would follow. If they did not, they could walk away. None walked out immediately. Some left after the meeting, no doubt unconvinced. Others stayed in the darkness, lingering to speak with her or to watch her, as though trying to glimpse the deeper truths of her soul. Over the next months, Arya prepared herself for a great expedition. She had money gleaned from hidden caches throughout Bravos, spoils from the missions she had carried out in her youth, coin she had scarcely touched when she returned to Westeros. She purchased a swift galley with hidden compartments, a vessel that could carry her and a small crew eastward. She selected a handful of individuals who were loyal to her cause, some of whom had begun calling her Lady of Shadows, a term she discouraged openly, though she did not deny that it felt strangely fitting. These chosen few were sworn to secrecy. She told them only enough of her plans to ensure that they would follow. Each had something in their past that needed forgetting, a reason to wear a new face, a reason to seek a future that was not chained to the old ways. They set sail on a crisp morning, the sea shimmering like polished steel. As Bravos' skyline receded behind them, Arya stood at the helm. She felt a pang of nostalgia, remembering her time there as an eager child, wide-eyed at the wealth and diversity of the great free city. But there was no turning back. Her eyes were fixed eastward now. Their first stop was Pentos, a sprawling port city whose prince in name only claimed to hold no real power but lived in luxury nonetheless. Pentos was a place where merchants and magisters ruled from the shadows, where deals were made and broken in smoky back rooms. Arya carried herself not as a noble, but as a traveler of moderate means. She let her crew disembark in small groups so as not to draw attention. While they replenished supplies and made discreet inroads with local informants, Arya walked through the busy markets, brushing shoulders with slavers, wealthy spice traders from the Jade Sea, and itinerant priests of foreign gods. Here, gold spoke louder than swords. She realized quickly that if her grand vision was to take root, she would need the resources that only wealth could buy. She discovered that a certain Magister Omerio was rumored to be in league with the few remaining warlocks from Karth, dabbling in arcane secrets for profit. He was also rumored to have a veritable army of sellswords at his disposal. Arya saw an opportunity. She attended one of Omerio's lavish banquets under an assumed identity, a wealthy Westerosi merchant's daughter, traveling with a retinue. Her training as a faceless man allowed her to mimic the accent of the Crownlands, to adopt the subtle haughtiness of a highborn lady unaccustomed to Essos. She wore a mask of a face older than her own, hair dyed auburn, eyes lined with kohl. The banquet was a swirling riot of color and sound. Musicians plucked strange strings, acrobats tumbled, and the scent of exotic delicacies filled every corner of the hall. Magister Omerio reclined on a couch of satin cushions, draped in cloth of gold robes. The color of his eyes hinted at the shadow of old Valyrian blood, but it was diluted by countless generations. Around him lounged courtesans and sycophants. Arya glided through the crowd, capturing the attention of some, but letting her gaze wander only when it served to gather information. She listened for the talk of sellsword contracts, of caravans lost in the Dothraki Sea, of skirmishes with raiders near Meereen. When at last she drew close enough to converse with Omerio, she wove a small tale. She was seeking new trade ventures, she said, perhaps rare spices or the rumored ghost grass of the Far East. Omerio, eyeing the beauty of her borrowed face, seemed intrigued. Arya's posture radiated a certain airy confidence that suggested wealth backing her ambition. Soft flattery worked wonders on the Magister's vanity, and soon he was summoning his steward to bring out exotic wines, describing his connection with certain individuals of extraordinary talents. He spoke of men who could slip into a fortress unseen, who could guarantee safe passage for caravans in the lawless steppes, for the right price. Arya pressed him gently, and he revealed more than he intended. The next day, she secured a private meeting at Omerio's villa. Her false retinue waited outside, but inside those golden walls, Arya calmly stripped away her borrowed face, piece by piece, as the Magister watched in horror and fascination. By the time she stood before him as herself, short hair, sharp, stark features, the cold steel in her eyes, Omerio was speechless. She spoke then of her proposition. She would not expose him for his dealings in illicit sorcery and for consorting with the warlocks. She had no interest in blackmail for gold. Instead, She wanted him to funnel his resources and contacts into an enterprise that would span the free cities. She made it clear that she was no random cell's word. She was a faceless one, trained in the house of black and white, though she had chosen a different path. Omario, fearful for his life, listened. When Arya finished, letting the final echo of her words settle in the still air, the Magister asked quietly what he stood to gain. Her reply was simple: a role in a new power structure that would overshadow all petty alliances. He could maintain his lavish lifestyle so long as he kept the arrangements secret. The alternative, unspoken, was a swift meeting with the many-faced god. Fear, greed, and the promise of power converged in the Magister's trembling acceptance. Over the following days, she brokered a contract that would provide her with discreet financing, equipment, and local contacts through Omario's network. In return, he would enjoy the protection of this emerging empire of shadows and remain in a privileged position, if he remained loyal. Arya left Pentos with more gold than she had arrived with and the seeds of an alliance that she would later cultivate. Their next journey took them through rougher waters as they skirted the coast, stopping briefly in Mir and then Lys. In Mir, she found the famed crossbowmen and glassmakers, some of whom lived in constant fear of rival city-states. In Lys, seduction and poison were as common as morning bread. She kept her visits short but made contact with a few individuals who understood the nuance of hidden power. The true test came when her ship finally crossed toward the notorious region that had once been Slaver's Bay. She had heard conflicting tales of Daenerys Targaryen's conquests, cities freed, then falling back into old patterns, or warlords rising in her absence. The name Targaryen still held a certain sway in Essos, but the reality on the ground was far more complex. Astapor, Yunkai, Meereen. These were places where the scar of slavery ran deep, and the political turmoil was never fully resolved. Arya saw in that chaos the chance to unify people under the protection of an identity that transcended old masters and old slaves. Upon entering the bay near Astapor, she immediately sensed the unrest. The once proud city still bore the blackened scars of conflict. Collapsed buildings, broken statues, and half-rebuilt monuments told a story of repeated revolutions. Merchants operated under constant threat from roving bands of sellswords who offered protection at a steep price. Arya's presence went unnoticed at first. She and her small retinue slipped ashore and found lodging in a dilapidated inn near the outskirts. The innkeeper eyed them warily. Foreigners were not uncommon, but foreigners who asked too many questions could attract the wrath of local gangs. Over days, she observed how the city's power structure functioned, or failed to function. Allegiances shifted weekly. A cunning group of former slaves, who called themselves the Red Hands, controlled the market district. A consortium of ex-mercenaries, ironically employing freedmen, dominated the harbor. Another faction, rumored to be funded by shadowy nobles from Volantis, was attempting to restore a form of indentured servitude. Violence simmered beneath every negotiation. The city was ripe for the kind of covert empire Arya intended to build, one based on fear and respect for the many-faced god, but also on an ideal of personal liberation from old identities. For the right people, it would be a chance to cast off shackles of the past and assume a new life, a new face, in service of a cause that stood above the city's petty infighting. She set about recruiting carefully. She met with the leaders of the Red Hands under a false identity, presenting herself as a traveling merchant in search of safer trade routes. She impressed upon them that she knew certain individuals who could guarantee swift, silent retribution against their enemies. In exchange, she asked for their cooperation and a measure of loyalty to a new power that could eventually absorb the city's fractured factions. They were skeptical but intrigued. She had her retinue demonstrate their skills. One was an excellent marksman, another a cunning forger, a third an adept of the Bravosi water dance. Small feats displayed behind closed doors convinced the Red Hands that there was more to Arya's group than met the eye. She also reached out to the mercenary consortium at the harbor, wearing another face entirely. This time, she claimed to be a disgruntled refugee from Pentos, seeking to hire muscle to protect caravans through the desert. She dangled gold, gleaned from Omario's coffers, and let slip rumors that if these mercenaries pledged themselves to her secret enterprise, they might earn more than they ever dreamed through future expansions. Her quiet confidence and readiness to pay generously softened their caution. Soon enough, they, too, were listening with rapt interest, though they asked many questions. Arya answered only those that would pull them deeper into her web. One night, a group of cutthroats tried to abduct her, perhaps suspecting she was wealthy or carrying valuables. She slipped away from them in the darkness with almost casual ease. When they found their leader the next morning, he had been dispatched with a neat slash across the throat. No sign of who had done it, no trace. A forced entry. The rumor spread that an invisible killer roamed the streets, that a new power was stirring. Rather than make the populace afraid of her specifically, Arya let the rumors swirl to create an aura of mystery around the entire concept of the Faceless. She wanted the city to see that her new empire would not be easily challenged. In time, she arranged a secret meeting in a derelict courtyard behind what was once a slave master's estate. The city's scum had been cleared away by the Red Hands, ensuring privacy. There, Arya revealed more of her plan to a select few leaders from the various factions. She spoke as Arya Stark, not bothering with a disguise. This was the moment to show them a glimpse of her truth. She admitted she had once been a disciple of the many-faced god, that she knew the secrets of stolen identities and silent assassinations. Yet she also spoke passionately of the chance for freedom from the tyranny of the old masters, the old ways that still lingered like a disease. She offered them an opportunity to become part of something larger than Astapor's petty feuds, a network that would stretch across all of Essos, perhaps even beyond, united by a singular code. No man or woman would be forced into it, but once they joined, there would be no turning back. Their old names, old grudges, old burdens would be left behind. The gathered leaders were a patchwork of skepticism, awe, and greed. Some saw her as a dangerous fanatic. Others saw her as a potential savior. Still, in the end, enough of them saw advantage in aligning with her that a fragile pact was formed. Arya did not expect immediate unity. She knew it would take time for her idea to gestate. So, she left behind a handful of her trusted followers to cement alliances, to teach the willing how to move unseen, how to listen to the city's pulse, how to transmit information securely. If they proved themselves, they would rise in the ranks of this nascent Faceless empire. If they betrayed her, they would learn the price of crossing the many-faced god. From Astapor, Arya moved on to Yunkai and Meereen in a similar fashion, adjusting her methods to suit each city's politics. In Yunkai, where the slavers had risen again after Daenerys departed, she orchestrated a series of nighttime strikes against a few notorious masters. Bodies were found with coins of the many-faced god placed on their chests, sending a clear message. Fear turned to speculation, and speculation turned to whispered talk of a new power that avenged the weak. In Meereen, she encountered former freedmen who still revered the Dragon Queen, lamenting the chaos that followed her departure. Arya carefully navigated their lingering loyalty to Daenerys' memory, presenting her Faceless empire as a continuation of the project to free the oppressed, but with methods that did not rely on dragons or open warfare. Months slipped into a year as Arya and her closest companions traveled further inland, forging connections among the Dothraki Khalasars. That was a riskier venture. The Dothraki respected only strength, but they also revered cunning. Arya managed to meet with several lesser Khals, some of whom had grown tired of raiding the same territories. She showed them the power of illusions, how a single assassin could weaken an entire enemy camp by removing its strongest warriors in their sleep. She promised them wealth if they agreed to form alliances instead of simple raids, channeling their aggression into a protective force that could earn a steady stream of tribute from towns in exchange for safe passage. The concept of anonymity intrigued a few. The notion that one might adopt the face of an outsider and walk among the Lamb men without detection seemed like powerful witchcraft to them. She gained a few converts there as well, though the Dothraki were less organized than the city dwellers, and it would take time to weave them into her grand design. All the while, Arya's confidence grew. Her background as a Stark taught her to value loyalty and tenacity. Her training as a Faceless one taught her to value secrecy and precision. Combined, These traits made her a formidable leader in the shadows, forging bonds that ordinary conquerors never even knew existed. Whenever she felt doubt creeping into her mind, she remembered the faces of those who had suffered, the memory of the butcher's boy Micah, her friend Gendry's struggles, her sister Sansa's torment, her own father's execution. She remembered how powerless she had once been. The many-faced god had offered her a blade in the darkness, but she had chosen to wield it with a sense of purpose beyond mere murder. Now, she was forging that purpose into an empire without borders. Eventually, rumors of her exploits began to ripple back to Bravos, and from Bravos, they drifted westward in bits and pieces. In Westeros, few could believe that young Arya Stark had become a power player in Essos. Some dismissed the stories as wild exaggerations. Others, particularly those who had seen Arya's capabilities up close, like her siblings, wondered if there was truth to the tales. But Arya did not care for the opinions of Westerosi nobility anymore, though she still held her family dear in her heart. She was building something bigger than any single kingdom, and she had no illusions about returning to the quiet life of a lady. The Faceless Empire, as some had begun to name it, was consuming her entire being. Her next major objective lay in Volantis, the oldest of the free cities, where the Red Temple of R'hllor and the Old Blood of Valyria held sway. Volantis was massive and ancient, its colossal black walls housing the palatial estates of pure Valyrian descendants, while outside the walls teemed the common folk, slaves in all but name. The city's power structure was formidable. The priests of R'hllor held fervent religious authority, while the Triarchs, 3 elected rulers, managed the city's sprawling bureaucracy. If Arya could plant the seeds of her influence in Volantis, she could link her network across much of Essos. Upon arrival, the sheer size and chaos of Volantis overwhelmed even her. The Long Bridge alone was a city in miniature, packed with stalls, beggars, elephants, and courtesans. Priests of the Red God proselytized to throngs of listeners, proclaiming that the night was dark and full of terrors. Arya knew well the dangers of the dark. She kept her group small and inconspicuous, scattering her allies in different lodgings throughout the city. She intended to stay for weeks, maybe months, if necessary, weaving her way into the labyrinth of politics. Her approach began with the underbelly, as always. She connected with the shadow markets along the river, where smugglers peddled in contraband and passing pirates drank away their spoils. She garnered introductions to dockworkers who complained bitterly about the Triarch's corruption. Through bribes and discreet threats, she slowly moved up the chain to petty officials and minor priests who had grievances with the current regime. Each conversation was a piece of a puzzle, each alliance a building block for her shadowy edifice. But Volantis was not easily cowed. The city's entrenched powers had survived centuries of invasions and uprisings. More than once, Arya's emissaries found themselves cornered by local enforcers. There were skirmishes in back alleys. A few of her people were captured, though they vanished from their cells without a trace, leaving behind nothing but the carved visage of the many-faced god scratched into the stone. Word spread among the city's underworld that dealing with this new faction meant dancing with death itself. Arya recognized that fear alone would not secure Volantis. She needed to cultivate a sense of purpose, just as she had done elsewhere. She focused on finding those souls who sought release from the city's tyranny, slaves longing for true freedom, young nobles chafing under the rules of the Old Blood, priests disillusioned with the dominance of the Red Temple. Slowly, she convinced them that their liberation lay in abandoning their old ties and joining her new order. She promised that if enough of them banded together under the Faceless Empire, they could disrupt the entire system of volantine slavery and aristocracy from within, without open warfare, purely through infiltration and silent strikes. It was a bold claim, but it resonated with the desperate. Her entreaties reached the ears of certain Red priests who believed in a prophecy that conflicted with the established orthodoxy. They held private gatherings beneath the city in secret temples, chanting in low, resonant voices. Arya met with one of their leaders, a woman called Carantha the Flame-Touched, whose eyes glowed with a fervent light. Carantha believed that the many-faced god and the Lord of Light were but facets of the same cosmic force, life and death intertwined. Arya didn't entirely agree with her theology, but she saw value in forging a spiritual alliance. If the Red Priests could be convinced that the Faceless Empire furthered the goals of R'hllor, cleansing the darkness through targeted kills, then they might offer her safe passage and resources. Carantha listened intently as Arya spoke of a balance beyond mortal comprehension. The priestess nodded, though it was not clear if she fully believed or if she simply saw an advantage for her sect. As Arya conducted these intricate negotiations, she also found herself reflecting on the deeper meaning of what she was building. She had set out initially to create a network that upheld the principle of the many-faced god's justice, offering people the chance to cast off old identities. Yet with each new city, the enterprise took on a life of its own. People whispered her name as if she were a legendary figure. Her agents called her the Unseen Queen or the Knight's Blade. Despite her protestations, she realized that she was stepping into the role of a monarch in all but title, but one who ruled from the shadows. It made her uneasy. She remembered her father, Ned Stark, a man of honor who had never sought power for its own sake. She wondered if he would approve of her methods, or if he would see them as a necessary evil to prevent greater suffering. There was no simple answer, and she found herself haunted by doubts in her quieter moments. In Volantis, her plan took a significant stride forward when she orchestrated an event that shook the city's power structure to its core. A major triarch, famed for his cruelty toward slaves, was found dead in his bedchamber. No signs of forced entry, no poison detected. By all accounts, it looked as though he had simply ceased breathing. But rumors circulated that a pale figure had been glimpsed climbing the walls of his mansion at midnight, slipping through his bedroom window. By dawn, the entire city buzzed with speculation. Many believed it was the Faceless Men, exacting some unknown vendetta. Others pointed to the Red Temple, claiming the Triarch had offended R'hllor. The Triarch's allies were left scrambling, unsure whom to blame or how to retaliate against an enemy that was nowhere and everywhere. In the ensuing chaos, several local families that had been on the brink of ruin found themselves lifted from obscurity by well-placed bribes and the sudden removal of their rivals. Those who had pledged loyalty to Arya's cause suddenly gained influence. The city's intricate hierarchy shifted imperceptibly, like tectonic plates, ushered along by an unseen hand. That was the essence of the Faceless Empire, transformation without the spectacle of conquest. By the time most realized what was happening, the pieces had already moved into place. With Volantis partially brought into her fold, Arya felt her dream was no longer a distant ambition. It was becoming reality, one city at a time. She felt a surge of pride mixed with dread. What was the endgame? Would she keep expanding indefinitely, uniting the entire continent under the banner of no banner? She recalled how Daenerys Targaryen had once sought to break the wheel. Now Arya was forging a new will made of shadows and secrets. The difference, she told herself, was that this wheel would not crush the innocent. At least she hoped it wouldn't. Power had a way of corrupting even the noblest intentions, and she was no saint. She was a killer who believed in a form of cosmic justice. Would that be enough to keep her empire free from tyranny? She sailed farther east, to the edge of the world she knew. She visited Qarth, the so-called greatest city that ever was or will be, shimmering with wealth and treachery. There, she encountered a handful of warlocks who remembered the days when Daenerys had scorched them with her dragons. They regarded Arya with suspicion, but also a hint of curiosity. One warlock, a gaunt man with lips stained blue from the shade of the evening, whispered cryptic prophecies about masks over masks, a wolf leading the Faceless. Arya listened, gleaning only that her path was fated for some grand design, or so the warlock believed. She did not place much stock in riddles but found them vaguely unsettling. Nonetheless, Qarth offered trade routes and potential alliances with exotic merchants who dealt in rare substances, perfect for the subtle arts of assassination. She made deals, exchanged promises, and left quietly, as was her custom. Beyond Qarth lay lands she only knew from sailors' tales, places like the Jade Sea, Ashai, and even rumored realms in the Far East. For the moment, she decided she had extended her network enough to begin consolidating. She felt the pull back westward, to Bravos, the city that had birthed the Faceless men. She wanted to show her old mentors what she had accomplished, to see if they would stand with her or against her. So she turned her ship around, charting a course back through the ports she had visited, ensuring that her growing network was stable. In each city, she found that her people had begun calling themselves the Nameless Brothers or the Unbound, taking pride in their liberation from old identities. She also received reports of smaller cells forming spontaneously in places she had barely touched, drawn by the rumor of a hidden empire that promised refuge and power to the dispossessed. By the time she reached Bravos again, her reputation preceded her. She was no longer just the strange girl who had returned to the House of Black and White. She was the rumored founder of a vast syndicate that stretched from Pentos to Myrine, from Yunkai to Volantis, a ghostly empire born of cunning and bloodshed. Stepping onto the Bravosi docks, she noticed how the harbor workers eyed her crew. She felt an electric tension in the air. She allowed herself a small smile. It was good to be recognized, even if only by rumor. She made her way through the winding streets until she arrived at the House of Black and White itself. It stood as solemn as ever, a facade of half ebony, half ivory, perched at the edge of the quiet aisle. The doors opened soundlessly to admit her. Inside, the familiar gloom enveloped her. Candles flickered, and the statues of forgotten gods loomed. She walked softly, recalling her time there as an acolyte, how she had once tried so hard to become no one, to forget her name. A figure emerged from the dim corridor, the kindly man, or perhaps someone wearing his face. He regarded her with blank curiosity. Behind him, a dark-robed servant glided silently, bearing a metal rod that smoked with incense. Arya inclined her head respectfully, but did not kneel. She spoke her own name, quietly defying the pretense of anonymity. The kindly man listened. She recounted her journey, her reasons, her vision. She did not embellish nor plead for approval. She stated plainly that she had built something that resonated with the will of the many-faced god. A vast network that dispensed death where it was needed, that offered rebirth to those who would serve. Yet she had done so on her own terms, not under the strict discipline of the house. She waited for his judgment, half expecting censure or worse. The kindly man said nothing at first. Then, in that soft voice, he asked if she thought she was above the laws of the Faceless men. She replied that she did not consider herself above them, only different. The House of Black and White served a singular purpose, to fulfill the gods' demand for death in balance. Arya's empire, she explained, was an extension of that principle but applied to the living as well, giving them new lives, new identities. She wanted to expand the concept of the gift. The kindly man regarded her with eyes like polished stone, unreadable. At length, he said that the many-faced god had many servants and many faces, and that if Arya believed she had found a new face for the god, so be it. The Faceless men would neither oppose nor endorse her wholeheartedly. She was free to continue her path, as free as any mortal who walked in the shadows of the divine. His words were neither a blessing nor a curse. They left Arya with a sense of profound ambiguity. She had hoped for some acknowledgement that she was doing the god's work correctly, or at least not perverting it. Instead, she had been given a cryptic acceptance, or perhaps simply an indifference. She bowed and left. Outside the House of Black and White, she breathed the crisp Bravosi air and realized she was, in truth, alone. She had parted from her family in Westeros, severed her old ties, and now even the House of Black and White would not stand beside her as an ally. She was forging a path uniquely her own. Something stirred within her at that realization, an ember of fierce independence. She spent the following months in Bravos, meeting discreetly with merchants, bankers, and captains. She set up a permanent base of operations in a nondescript building by the canal, from which messages could be dispatched to her growing empire. She formalized a clandestine courier system, employing trained runners and small boats that navigated the city's watery streets at night. She had codes and ciphers, hidden compartments in cargo holds, and a chain of loyal operators who had proved themselves worthy. Information from all over Essos now flowed to her, including word that the remnants of the Golden Company were stirring after years of dormancy, possibly seeking new conquests. She considered reaching out to them, but she sensed they were too deeply tied to old claims in Westeros. Her empire was meant for people who were ready to leave old claims behind. In secret gatherings at her base, she spoke to her growing circle of confidants about the next phase. Many wanted her to declare herself openly, to demand tribute from lesser guilds, to crush the city-states that resisted. Arya refused. She reminded them that the Faceless Empire was about subtlety and transformation, not open war. She ordered that all expansions would continue in the same manner as before, quiet infiltration, forging alliances with the marginalized, using the threat of unstoppable assassins to keep powerful figures in check. Some grumbled, wanting a more direct approach to seize control. Arya stood firm, letting them see the glint of steel in her eyes. She had not come this far to become a petty warlord. Yet tension brewed within her ranks. Certain ambitious members believed they could harness the Empire's growth for personal gain, ignoring the vow to abandon one's old identity. Arya noticed a few suspicious disappearances among her inner circle. Whispers of betrayal drifted on the nighttime breeze. One evening, a loyal follower named Katrin caught a conspirator trying to poison Arya's wine. The conspirator confessed under duress that a faction within the Empire sought to use her name as a banner to rally an army that would conquer entire cities openly. They planned to dispose of her once she refused to go along. Arya listened quietly to the trembling conspirator's words, the old stark rage simmering just beneath her calm exterior. When he finished, she gave the unspoken signal, and Katrin ended his life with a quick slash. The next day, she convened a secret tribunal with her most trusted lieutenants. She wore a face of sorrow, but her voice was resolute as she addressed the handful of traitors brought before her. She spoke of the vow they had made, to serve the many-faced god's principle of balance, to become part of something greater than personal ambition. Then, without a flicker of emotion, she passed judgment. One by one, the traitors were handed the gift of the many-faced god. Their bodies were disposed of quietly, leaving no trace for the city's authorities. Arya did not revel in the executions, but she saw it as a necessary measure to preserve the integrity of what she had built. Power was a double-edged sword, and betrayal was the sharpest threat from within. Over time, she refined her organizational structure. Members were initiated through a ritual reminiscent of the House of Black and White. They would kneel before a pool of dark water, speak their old names, and drop a coin into the pool, a symbolic shedding of their past. Then they would receive a new face, crafted for them if they proved worthy. The most trusted and skilled became what Arya called Nightblades, agents who could move across borders, gather intelligence, and carry out covert missions to maintain the Empire's influence. Each Nightblade reported only to a single superior, ensuring secrecy. In theory, none of them knew the identities of the others outside their cell. Gradually, the Faceless Empire took on the contours of a vast, living organism. It was no longer just Arya's dream. It was an entity that had the potential to outlast her. She oversaw its growth from Bravos, occasionally making visits to key cities to manage crises or negotiate alliances. Everywhere she went, she saw signs of her empire's presence. Coded graffiti on alley walls, rumors of a ghostly killer who left no footprints, fleeting glimpses of masked figures in the night. She felt both proud and uneasy at the scale of what she had created. As the years passed, her hair turned more silvered at the temples, and the lines around her eyes deepened. But her gaze never lost its intensity. She remained agile, still capable of besting recruits half her age in a spar. The ghost of the little girl who once carried a sword called Needle lingered in her memories, but she had become something else entirely. A figure of legend, half real, half myth, whispered about in markets and ports across Essos. Some claimed she was immortal, a goddess of death reborn. Others said she was a shape-shifting shadow from Ass High. Still others whispered that she had once been a child of a noble house in Westeros. But that was surely impossible. No highborn child could become this avatar of the many-faced god. In private, Arya sometimes thought of Winterfell, of her siblings, of the stark words echoing in her mind. Winter is coming, She wondered if she would ever lay eyes on the snow-covered battlements again, or whether her home now lay among the canals of Bravos and the dusty streets of Marine. She found a quiet solace in the notion that her mother and father would live on in her memories, that her siblings were safe, rebuilding Westeros in their own ways. She was forging her own legacy in the East, a realm of shifting identities and silent blades. Conflict inevitably arose with other powers. Merchant princes of the Jade Sea bristled at the expansion of a covert syndicate that dared to meddle in their trade. Red priests clashed with the Empire's refusal to openly acknowledge R'hlloreth's supremacy. Even the Iron Bank took note, uncertain whether to treat Arya as a threat or an ally. She managed these tensions through carefully orchestrated deals, assassinations, and alliances, always striving to maintain balance. Occasionally, she heard news from Westeros. Someone claiming the throne, someone losing it, or a new threat stirring in the far north. But those concerns felt distant, like echoes from a childhood tale. Decades into her reign, though she never called it a reign, Arya Stark had woven an invisible tapestry of power that spanned from the free cities to the Dothraki Sea and beyond. Millions of people lived their lives unaware that their fates might be nudged by the silent hand of the Faceless Empire. Some travelers told stories of caravans that never encountered bandits, thanks to unseen protectors. Others spoke of tyrants who died mysteriously in their sleep, or of entire slave markets shutting down without explanation. Little by little, the world changed, not through cataclysmic wars, but through the accumulation of small, precise interventions orchestrated by Arya's agents. Those who joined the Empire found new purpose and identity. Those who resisted its spread often found themselves either confounded or quietly disposed of. In the final stretch of her journey, Arya pondered how her life had led here. She recalled the frightened girl who had once wandered the forests of Westeros, reciting a list of names in the darkness. Each name was a promise of death. Now she presided over countless names, faces, lives. She had taught them to become no one and everyone. Her earliest vow had been to never be powerless again, to avenge her family and carve her own path. In a way, she had kept that vow and gone far beyond it, reshaping an entire continent's underbelly to her vision. Still, she was not naive enough to believe she had created a perfect system. She knew corruption could take root anywhere, even among those who served her. She relied on a delicate balance of fear and loyalty, just as the faceless men in Bravos had done for centuries. If her empire endured, it would do so because the ideals of shedding one's old life and seeking balance appealed to those trapped in cycles of misery and violence. If it failed, it would collapse under its own secrecy and ambition. Arya accepted this with a quiet resignation. One day, she might vanish into the night, passing her role on to another who had donned the right face to lead. Maybe that was the true essence of serving the many-faced god, to recognize that the individual did not matter, only the idea. On a cool morning, she stood on the bow of a ship once more, sailing across the narrow sea. This time, she was not returning to Westeros as a wayward child, nor as a lonely traveler. She was the unofficial ruler of a kingdom without borders, an empress of shifting identities. The wind carried her forward. She did not know if she would set foot on the shores of her homeland or if she would only skirt the coastline, perhaps sending a final, silent greeting to the land of her birth. She thought of Sansa, Bran, Jon, and the ghosts of her family. She whispered a soft farewell, though she could not say whether she was bidding farewell to them or to the girl she had once been. The sea stretched out before her, vast and calm. Her journey was not over, nor would it end with her. Others would carry on the legacy of the Faceless Empire, adopting her techniques, refining her methods, forging new paths. The assassin who became an empire builder. The girl who refused to be a lady, yet became something akin to a queen. Arya Stark, daughter of Ned and Catelyn, Wolf of Winterfell, disciple of the many-faced god, had done what few ever dreamed possible. She had conquered not through dragons or armies, but through the power of discarded names and hidden faces. As the morning light glimmered on the water, she smiled faintly, feeling the gentle sway of the ship beneath her feet. She closed her eyes and let the breeze brush against her skin. She was no one, and she was all. The gulls cried overhead, and in their distant echo, she heard the beginning of a new tale. There would always be a new name, a new face, a new thread to weave into the tapestry. For a moment, she let herself believe that perhaps this was the best she could do. For herself, for the world. And with that final thought, she opened her eyes and guided her vessel onward, into the horizon that promised endless possibilities, where the wolf of the north and the servant of the many-faced god could forever roam free.